Go. Jennifer Strong is our moderator. I've already told you a little bit about her. Joining her on her panel, Dr. Jane Munga, who is the fellow in the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace's Africa Program, and her research focuses on Africa's digital transformation with a focus on creating an enabling environment. Nicholas Bramble is the head of economic policy at Google, and he served previously as a presidential innovation fellow with the US Treasury Department. And also joining them will be Alex Tsado, who's the co-founder of Alliance for AI. He's also the co-founder and COO of Ahura AI. I keep looking backwards because I think they're going to drop something. You know, these AI people are very weird, you know. I'm thinking, okay, fine. Am I going to see some machines just crawling onto the stage just to get us going? I'm sure they're getting ready and they're getting organized, and they will join us momentarily. Okay, I shouldn't be laughing. The irony, I can't resist. We have not had a single microphone collapse or any batteries not working. And just at this moment where we are about to persuade you that the world is changing and you better be ready because what you know may no longer work, we have a microphone issue. And we are fixing it. I fixed it all by myself. Jennifer Strong, reporting fellow for the Pulitzer Center. Thank you very much, and your panelists as well. Thanks.
Well, hello, everybody. Uh-oh. Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. All right, so I am Jennifer Strong. I am a reporting fellow for the Pulitzer Center, and I make programs for public radio and a lot of other podcasts for newsrooms over the years about AI. And maybe we should just go down the line here and introduce ourselves. Dr. Jane?
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to have everybody here. Welcome. I'm Jane Munga with the Carnegie Endowment Africa Program. I'm the fellow focusing on tech.
Hey everybody, I'm Nick Bramble. I work at Google and I lead our economic policy work. It's a real honor to be here in this, especially in this theater, which I've been to many times in the audience, and it's just a really fun and great venue in DC.
And then I'm Alexander Sado. I wear two hats. First, as a co-founder of Alliance for Africa's Intelligence, that was set up to ensure that we're not left behind in tech revolutions. And secondly, as co-founder of Ahura AI, which was set up to ensure the workforce is not left behind in the AI revolution. So that's what I keep myself busy with.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, so the rise of automation and AI systems present, as with everywhere else, unique challenges and opportunities for the continent. And, you know, these things can overlap. Two things can be true at the same time. These lines can be blurry. But I want to start, because this group brings together a fascinating background of experience, a wide, different types of experiences. I think it's going to be especially interesting to hear you lay out what you think are some of the new opportunities, some of the unique opportunities as you see them.
I'm happy to start. Africa is such a critical continent for artificial intelligence today and going forward. And I think we chatted backstage a little bit about both sort of the upside and downside risks around AI. But I think the enthusiasm we have seen from the people of Africa, from developers, from the youth, and from many other industries has been just overwhelming. If you look at sort of surveys around the world of which countries and which regions are most excited about the potential of AI to solve big picture societal challenges, to address the Sustainable Development Goals, Africa is leading the pack in terms of optimism and excitement about this technology. Now, of course, with this technology becomes a variety of risks as well. But I think it's really critical for us to sort of take a step back and ensure that we have learned the lessons of the past. So I think there's always a temptation when it comes to technology to assume that you can just build things and amazing things will happen automatically without a lot of involvement from governments or from other stakeholders. And I think we've learned, and I hope we have learned some lessons from the past 20 years or so of technology development. And we need to recognize that these things do not happen automatically. You need smart governmental investment. You need smart regulation. You need smart governance, and you need interoperable governance across different parts of the continent. So I think there's a lot of optimism, but there's also a need to ensure that we are thinking through these things as a balance and that we are addressing both the downside and the upside risks of AI in a clear-minded way, which I think the African Union has done very well so far.
I can actually build on that point and say that since 2020, we have been engaging with several government organizations in Africa, from the African Union to the Smart Africa Initiative driven from Rwanda, and then several countries like South Africa and Nigeria. And the message that we've really been bringing to these spaces, or rather that we are observing, like the big conversation is similar to what you're saying, where it is, how can we pay attention to other parts of the world that are, you could say, ahead with this technology and figure out how we can design it differently, right, to work for our people. And I could say, as one example, the way the conversation is happening in Nigeria now is how can we use AI as an equalizer? Mm-hmm. How can we focus our minds? How can we focus it all the way down to the developer or the scientist that's building so that they ask themselves, this use case I'm applying AI to, how many jobs is it going to create, right? What basic necessities is it going to fill a gap of, right? So that's how we're thinking about things differently in Africa.
Okay. I think for me, I'll start with a very interesting analogy and point you to this table. There are 4 glasses, and are they either half full or half empty? Half empty, half full? It depends on who is being asked this question, right? And I think the question about AI, is it good, is it bad, can go into that. If you're really thirsty, you would want that to have the capacity to drink as much water, so you want to add more. But if you're trying to empty something, you want it to have more capacity. So the question is that we need to start asking ourselves, what can AI do for us, and what perspective are you coming with that? For as an African continent, we have to start looking at this, at the potential of what it offers. Yes, there are risks. I try not to focus the work that we do. The Carnegie Africa Program, we're reading about, and as Zainab talked about it earlier this morning, we're trying to look at the intersection of foreign policy and economic development. So even in the work that we're doing on AI, I think it's important we focus on that socio-economic development. My panelists here have talked about what are these potential goods, and when it comes to jobs, when it comes to health, when it comes to finances. For example, I come from Kenya, where we've been talking about mobile money. I mean, the potential use cases that are coming from AI, I think, are great. And how can we extend this to as many people as possible and not leave anybody behind? Because we can also not forget that not everybody has access to these technologies. So again, is AI good or bad? I want to say it's good, but also I can ask again, Is the glass half empty or half full? We'll never know, depending on how you want to approach this. So I think it's for us to determine then, how do you want to answer this question?
No, of course. Or is AI just a tool and it depends on how we use it?
That's true. We can start with all the hypothetical questions here.
So, all right, but the flip side of that coin, so of the tangible opportunities, what are some tangible challenges that are like practical, real world, that will help everyone understand what we're talking about here?
Yeah, so Africa is such a unique continent in terms of its youth population. And if you look at sort of the current demographic trends, I think by 2050, 1 in 4 people on the planet will be African, and 1 in 3 youths will be in Africa. So the future of the world's workforce and energy around AI development, I think, is based in Africa and will be based even more so. Google is investing very heavily in the continent since we've had offices there for 18 years and have built a variety of subsea and terrestrial cables to bring down the cost of connectivity and ensure that we're not replicating the digital divides of the past with AI. We want to ensure that we have learned those lessons and that we are building connectivity across and around the continent that really allows anybody, both on the coast and inland as well, via a new terrestrial cable we have just launched, to get access to those technologies. Like, why does this matter? I think there's a variety of ways in which we think about these issues, both from a sort of addressing sustainable development goals perspective and an economic perspective. So 2 quick examples on the development side. I think one thing we have is a variety. We have 2 big AI research centers, one in Kenya and one in Ghana. And the goal of these research centers is to ensure that we are building applications that meet local needs. For example, those centers are developing a flood forecasting hub, which we have now launched in, I think, 24 different African countries, which is meant to provide, based upon the use of both historical and real-time weather data, much more accurate, much more precise flood predictions. We can alert someone that a flood is happening a week away versus 24 hours or 48 hours away. This can save lives, and it can also really ensure that local agencies, local disaster relief agencies, are prepared and have a plan in place to address these kinds of concerns. And on the health side, I think it's even more exciting. There is a huge concern around maternal health in sub-Saharan Africa. One estimate is that 580 women die each day from preventable pregnancy-related causes in sub-Saharan Africa. And we've done some analysis to show that half of that can be reduced by access to timely emergency obstetric care. And we've built with Jacaranda Health in Kenya sort of a handheld ultrasound AI-driven piece of technology that can broaden the reach of antenatal care to these very much in demand areas right now. So that's on the health side. We can talk about economics more later in the panel.
Great. Anybody else?
Yeah, outside of robust policy frameworks, I'll tell you the other 3 levers that we just focus on. And it's a progression, right? It's a progression. So it's data, talent, and compute, right? So from 2020, it was the first 2 first, because you had to get the first 2 first right before you could talk to anybody to give you what you needed for compute, because it's not peanuts. So on the data side, it's figuring out what needs to be done to unlock the piles of data that exist. I think the first thing people say in Africa is there's no data, but that's not correct. There's a lot of data in government, in hospitals, across. It's now figuring out how to get it to be in a usable format, and also how to create data that you don't already have, right? So last 4 years have been public-private partnerships, and it's great to see the donor community participate as well, from USA to Mozilla, doing things like Mozilla Common Voice, building a massive data set of languages in Kenya, Swahili, and many more, to data science Nigeria, working with Gates Foundation, building Yoruba, Hausa, and all of that. So huge, that's data. That's made a lot of progress the last 4 years. Talent has made some progress the last 4 years, with several communities across the continent training people to understand what's machine learning, deep learning, start to learn how to build AI tools. There's still massive gap, but there's been some work there. The next phase of it needs to be how can the government help scale what's already happened from that's been helped by the donor communities, right? From what kind of investment is needed to mandate that computer science and AI specialization be taught in universities. So that's the next phase, and I think there are folks in the audience that can make that happen, so that's what we need to be thinking about. And then the last piece is compute. That's starting from ground zero. We don't have any compute in Africa. I mean, yes, there are a couple countries like Senegal, Morocco, South Africa was the first one, close to like 2011, 2012. I interpret it as there's not much. And this year needs to be the year where we need to make significant movement there. And it's going to require several things.
I think my addition on that is there's so many use cases and use potential that we can use AI for. I think the challenge now that those of us who are stakeholders and especially for policymakers and those who are driving is to start identifying the key user cases. Because if from when you wake up to when you go to bed, there's so many potential ways of looking at how AI. And I think there's still a struggle to see how to best utilize this. But also the reality of AI is what he's just said. You need the foundational infrastructure, you need the data, you need compute power, you need the skills. And some of these things are not cheap. He didn't mention one important thing, energy. That we are still scattering around. So it's important that once we identify those economic development issues or the socio-economic development issues, I think we can start having a narrative around it that if countries identify within African countries, and I mean there are 55, so each country would be in their best interest to identify what is, if it's education, if it's health, then start building an industry around that or building the conditions that are needed around that. Because I think it will take a while for most of Africa to grow the basic infrastructure, first the connectivity and all these other things have been said. So trying to have a goal, where are we going? Maybe the organizations, the industry can help us do that. I think that would be key to start moving us more to a pointed direction. Because I think right now there's a lot of, we're trying to do this, and scaling is a big issue. But then what is the answer? What are we trying to solve at the end of the day? Can we identify that? Can we answer that? And if you put 55 different countries, they may all have their own different
They do have their own AI strategies.
They all have, I've had very many different things. So I think we need to start coming to an agenda that is clear. And it should not be one, it should be based on the country's specific needs.
And I mean, you point out all kinds of wonderful points. Some of these issues are not an Africa issue, they're an everywhere issue. There is the first question of if you're going to build a system in the interest of people. You know, my neighbor and I don't always agree on exactly what we think is the right path to something. When you start talking about all of humanity, it's next, like I just spent a year on a documentary called The Race to Superintelligence, and we're still not entirely sure where we're racing to, you know? So, and then to back up and say right now with things like cloud credits, okay, how do you get priority for these types of things? How do you get enough energy for these types of things? And then to get back to the final point of like, well, we needed to drive before we fully understood the power and use case of seatbelts. So some of this will be still figuring out where it is we're going while we're on the path.
True.
But I want to come back around to make this a little more concrete, to talk about solutions and the types of applications that we see now that we think are going to be most, I want to say useful, but really, I mean, from my perspective, I would probably guess healthcare and agriculture, but I'll throw that to each of you.
You know, on agriculture, I think that is going to be an extremely important focus within Africa. So our two AI centers are very focused on food security as well. And so we have extensive research taking place into how to understand what smallholder farmers' challenges are in the region. And we've done some research to show that I think there are 500 million smallholder farmers globally, not just in Africa, of course. And they produce 70% of the world's food. This is an extremely important part of the global workforce. But 90% of them earn less than the basic living income standard in their region, and 70% live below the poverty line. So I think there is a real challenge there of how do you improve productivity, how do you improve wage gains for that part of the workforce. We have done some work with a number of different third parties to figure out how do you analyze what crop is best to grow and sell at a given time, how do you use global market data and make that data accessible to smallholder farmers, how do you automate pest control, how do you breed more resilient seeds. There's a lot of different sort of factors that go into figuring out how to improve the well-being of that part of the population. But that is an area I think of great potential. And sometimes, I think with AI, we see it right now mostly through chatbots, which are, sort of the tip, maybe the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's happening beneath the surface on AI right now. But there's so many new interesting sectoral applications happening, scientific things happening. You know, one example that I've been just really interested in recently is sort of the development of new materials. So, you know, within batteries, within solar panels, within smartphones, there are all these, at the very basic level, there are inorganic crystals that form these kinds of technologies. And, but there are challenges in ensuring we have enough critical minerals to build those technologies going forward. But there have been some recent innovations, including from Google's DeepMind lab, to show that we can now sort of use AI to understand the underlying structure of these crystals. And we've developed sort of 1.2 million new additional sort of previously undiscovered crystals. Now, not all of these are going to be useful, but even if a small fraction of them are, that's a huge potential to figure out how we can avoid more destructive mining practices and instead go towards sort of a lab-based development of these kinds of minerals.
Absolutely.
Yes, the ones you mentioned are very big when it comes to healthcare and agriculture. The third one I'll add there is tools that enable business to work. Mm-hmm. Business support tools. And this could be extremely massive, right? And I'll go back to the previous big change that happened in the continent, I think, is the mobile revolution, right? Just 2 decades ago, the things that needed to happen, first from the public sector, the governments of Africa, I must commend them for what they allowed happen or helped to drive there. And where it is now is that in places like Nigeria, the mobile economy is driving, I think it's contributing about 16% to the national GDP of Nigeria, and somewhere under 10% of all of Africa, right? I truly believe that AI can do the same, if not more. If people are prioritizing building, applying it to the right use cases. And one of those that I would say is in building tools that support African businesses to be more productive and just drive more growth.
Okay. So a very interesting question.
I don't mean to make you go last, everyone. By the way, you can.
Maybe I can be more provocative here and say, how do we get AI to build Wakanda? Anyway, but on a serious note, I think we have such huge problems right now with poverty. And what was mentioned here earlier, we have a youth bulge. We have a lot of young people who are unemployed. This population is continuing to grow. They're looking for jobs, they're looking for socioeconomic gains, and they're getting frustrated. I don't want to galvanize this conversation with what's happening in Kenya, but that's the reality. If we don't get these things right, this movement is young people are dissatisfied, they don't have work, they don't have money in their pockets. So how can we start using technology to answer some of these basic issues, some of these pressing issues? Yes, health is there, education is there, but at the end of the day, all these things are good, but if we do not have water, food, shelter, the basic, let's go back to the Maslow's hierarchy, the very basic. How do we start solving these issues? And we need to solve them quickly and urgently, because we are beginning to see a lot of unrest from Nigeria to East Africa, Ghana. I mean, this is a problem across the continent. So finding some of these solutions to some of these basic elements, I think is going to be primary for us, and then charting the path to what is that going to get us there. As I say, the economic issue is paramount for me. We need solutions, and urgently.
I'd like to talk about privacy also, just because I'm curious, like, to what extent is this conversation the same in lots of places, and to what extent is this conversation really different?
Do you want to go first with this one, Jane?
Sure. When it comes to privacy, there are a lot of issues and dynamics here. First, when one of the parts of the research that I do is I track policy regulations on the digital economy in Africa, and we've seen a lot of AI policies and strategies are also being mirrored by data protection laws. In some countries that do not have the AI regulations, they have primarily started with data protection, and that's how they're governing the AI. But the issue of privacy is being driven, one, now by mistrust, that first your data is being collected, there's a lot of that, and what I use in the data, when you're harvesting my data, but I'm not being able to gain from it economically, so there's that issue. Secondly, what I use in my data for, just that black box of, is it a security issue? Are you tracking me? What is my data being used for? And thirdly, like we saw with the World Coin, where you're being paid to input your iris and creating a database. It became a security issue because people are lining up to be paid and to create a database when you don't know where the data is going. But I think another thing that countries and sovereign nations are looking at is the issue of data localization. Your data is being exported, and there's some security data that needs to be at least stored in the country. That's the argument. So there are very many dimensions. When you came to data, I don't know which one you're going, so I'm trying to lay all of them out here. But it's a critical thing that we have to start discussing is because if we don't, a lot of governments are also now beginning to bring hesitation. And how are you treating our data? How are you collecting it? Who is doing it? What you? And so you're not even able to use it, even as the private sector. So we really need to get around the question of data protection and clear regulations and strategies of what kind of data can you use, how do you collect it? We'll talk about the infrastructure around it, how do you collect it? But above all, I think privacy also needs to be given to the person, the individual who has it. So some kind of agency when your data is being used, what can you do with it? What can you not do with it?
Mm-hmm.
I thought Dr. Munga put it really well. There's a taxonomy of different reasons to care about privacy. I think there's obviously a personal reason to care, but there's also a question of like, what is the economic incentive to give your data to a service and make it be part of an AI? So I think these are really important questions to get right internationally. And there has been, I think, increasing alignment globally on sort of some basic norms around privacy. The U.S. still does not have a federal privacy law, which is a challenge and something that we need to address. But I think in the meantime, you're seeing some companies step up and build privacy-enhancing technologies into AI. I think one really critical thing is to ensure that the outputs of AI are not violating privacy in any kind of way. So we have pretty robust checks in place, but we need to have those audited and validated by governments as well. We can't just trust companies, I think, to protect privacy in every context. I think there has been actually a lot of good work already on AI governance taking place, not just at sort of the national level, but also through global standards bodies like the International Standards Organization, which has a very strong set of emerging AI standards and privacy and security standards. I think it's important to figure out ways to use those standards as sort of the baselines for different regulatory proposals. For example, in the European Union, the AI Act has a lot in common with those standards. And so if you can certify against those global standards, you can help meet the requirements of privacy regulators, security and AI regulators in different markets. But in terms of like the need for there is a need for stronger global governance of AI. One thing I've noticed is that there are some pretty good sort of existing efforts. So the U.S. has taken a pretty major role to build up, both through the Commerce Department and through the White House and other agencies, a strong set of commitments that companies have adhered to. Those commitments have now been multilateralized to the G7 and some other sort of institutions. But I'm not sure that Africa is really part of that process so far. So I'm a little bit worried that the safety institutes that have been set up, they've been in the UK and Korea and France, there hasn't been as much participation from the Global South in those kinds of initiatives. So I do think we need to think through, as we're building these new governance institutions around privacy and security and safety, that they are fully inclusive of the populations that are using and ideally benefiting from AI.
Absolutely.
I don't think I'll add so much more to that, but the last point you made is a very, very big one. My question is, what's needed to make that happen, right? It does need to come from the groups who are already in the room. Because believe me, those of us outside the room are knocking hard, right? 2020, I made the first ask to get into some of these rooms, and I got into a few. But we're mostly not letting. Yeah.
It's interesting. Staying with governance for a minute, just because there is, as the last year and a half in particular, there has been so much activity between various African nations working on early data privacy rules, AI governance, and just in some cases, it's almost more blue skying, but what's interesting to me, having spent a number of years looking at governance globally, is that there's an opportunity to begin to get your arms around something before, as we would say, the horse has left the barn. Yeah. So versus us in the US trying to come up with data privacy rules this far into the game, or a plan after, we're so far along. But I'm curious from your perspectives, like how you feel about the state of governance and where people are working on things, and how optimistic or not are you that the work that's taking place right now will lead to where it is we're hoping to go?
Do we know where we're going? Do you know where we hope to? I mean, the conversation of AI, data governance, safety risk is what Nick has started, and it's a whole new conversation that first, there are so many different bodies where these conversations are happening, and we have not found one body. There's a work being done by the UN. The Summit of the Future is coming later this year. There've been a lot of, there was the H Lab that was put together. I mean, then there's the safety summits that he said people are trying to not, and it's true, a lot of African countries, now we're beginning to see that representation, but it's still very on the peripheral side. So the agenda almost seems that it has been set, but I think we are beginning to see a shift. I think we are beginning to see a more inclusive agenda, and that agenda is also now trying to balance between, of course, the economic opportunities and the risk opportunities of this. But I am not sure. I think I will shy away from saying that we have a clear definition of where we are going. I think that is something that is still heavily being debated. What are the norms that the world should coalesce around? There are those that are pushed by most of the global north, and there's always the geopolitics of it. Don't want to go there, but anyway, I'll stop it there.
Yeah. No, I think I am cautiously optimistic about the excitement around different governance institutions. I think the big question will be how do they fit together ultimately. Even within Africa, you have a variety of different countries adopting national AI strategies, and then you have the African Union trying to pull these together into a larger framework. I think you need to sort of have a blueprint in mind that creates sort of a continental-wide digital AI single market of some kind, to both to sort of drive common regulatory approaches, but also to drive more innovation and more sort of market access within the region for different companies in Africa that are trying to grow in that kind of way. And I think if you look at the work that UN has done, including through the high-level H Lab report, there's a really good focus there, I think, on trying to ensure that even as we focus on the real risks of misuse of AI, that we're also focused on missed uses and ensuring that we aren't governing and locking things down so much that we're eliminating the potential of the technology to really, right now we're so far behind on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I think we're hitting like 15% of those by 2030 at this rate. There is a real potential for AI to accelerate progress on those, both from a health and economic and inequality perspective. But I think there is a risk that if there's a fragmented governance regime, that it's going to be harder for us to get there together globally. So, but I think that motivation will help policymakers in Africa really understand the potential of this technology.
That makes sense.
And then to present examples of what you just described, in 2021 was when, with the Smart Africa Initiative, several organizations came together to work on what became the Smart Africa AI Blueprint. So that was created in 2021, and then it was supposed to inform other countries as they come up with their own strategies. I think it's going forward. I'm just not being as close to how it's progressing since then. But then Nigeria this year, as several other countries have taken seriously the building of a national AI strategy, and I want to say it has adopted several of the principles that were in that initial Smart Africa AI Blueprint. And there are many points within it that are about ensuring that we're using AI safely and that we're using AI to prioritize providing more equality. Well, I wouldn't even call it equality, just providing more access to opportunities for majority of the population. Just thinking through how can jobs be created, because that is what the population is looking for, right? It's growing massively. You described 2030 and you described 2050. All those people are going to need opportunities. Yeah. And how can you use AI and technology to create jobs and create those opportunities for them? Thankfully, there's progress.
Yeah. If I can just add one point, because I think this gets us to where we really need to start answering questions, is between these documents that we are seeing and what needs to be done. I still think we need to really identify a critical path, and one that is really fast-tracked. Because I think a couple of weeks ago when the African Union ICT ministers passed the AI policy framework, most of the comments are, this is great, we have a document, but how does that translate from a document to action? So I think the question of answering action is still very critical. And it's not a question to be answered just by policymakers. The private sector, all stakeholders have to come on board to answer that.
Yeah.
And that is what has started to happen in the last 2-3 months, which is phenomenal. I think we should be excited. Yes.
Yeah.
The private players, the private data center operators across Africa, the international data center operators and tech companies, Googles, the Amazons, all your friends. There's been movement from the private side of things, and so I'm positive of what's happening.
And I would just say, with the infrastructure investments, needs to come the skilling investments as well. I think oftentimes we treat human capital and skilling and workforce issues as separate from the broader policy and investment discussion, but they're extremely related in this case of AI because there's a lot of economic potential around AI, but if it only accrues to the wealthiest countries and the wealthiest companies in those countries, it actually won't have the sort of aggregate economic impact I think people expect it will have. It'll only, if only 4% or 5% of workers and people are using AI, that is not enough to sort of drive economy-wide impact. Yeah. And also, I think it stands to leave the agriculture, the traditional industries behind, which would be tragic, I think. And so by 2030 or 2040 or 2050, I think looking backwards, if we're going to get this right, we need to ensure this is inclusive of all industries, all workers, and all parts of the world.
Right, or else it just repeats so many of the same mistakes over and over again.
Yeah.
But going back to action, and also just that there is in some places quite a bit of action, right? We used to talk about leapfrogging, that eventually various countries would leapfrog because, well, I mean, M-Pesa, the payment system, was probably a great example going back some years, how much further along this was than anything we had in the United States. But I'm thinking now, too, digital services in a lot of African countries are racing forward. Mm-hmm. You've got also the ability to test and prove out some things. It's easier to do there in a number of countries than it is in the United States. So thinking, for example, like medical delivery drones are now a reality, helping save women in childbirth from hemorrhage and also bringing vaccines and other products to people in a timely way. I'm curious to hear each of your thoughts, like other things you think are moving quickly that you're seeing in the real world now.
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
I wish things were moving quicker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think the medicine and health applications of AI are where I'm really most excited. I think there has been some really interesting work done to sort of better understand like the protein structures that are underneath different kinds of diseases, including malaria and cancer and autism and a number of other sort of very intractable sort of challenges that we have as a world and as a society. And I think the more we can understand sort of what the underlying protein structures look like, that makes it much easier then to develop new kinds of drugs and treatments that can address all stages of a disease. So I think that is probably where I think things are going to move probably the fastest in the near term. But I think also where there's the most excitement and the most investment from the medical and scientific community in trying to ensure that we can really leverage these applications, because so much of the AI is just potential right now. I think we're all talking about sort of the models and sort of the underlying sort of innovations and what they're capable of. But I think that's probably where in the nearest term we're going to see the most exciting developments happen.
I feel like we're also, just to plug agriculture again, going to see that too, because I don't think, to your point, that we appreciate yet what having mobile penetration means yet. And you think, just because I've covered ag tech in the United States rather extensively, there's large swaths of this country that do not have cell phone access. Yeah. So what does that mean for tandem equipment that can't communicate? It's not, or in Brazil too, where they're having to take flash drive cards and drive them 50 miles to then, upload this stuff to then hope that the other machines can communicate. You can do some of that now. Yeah. And we're starting to see with some of the awards, especially in Kenya too.
I think that's the reality for us. If you're going to be within the African continent, you have to have solutions that also continue to work when they're not connected to the internet. And so it's until that device can communicate with the rest of the system, you have to have a way to ensure that it continues to work. Going back to your previous question, because I was really thinking to see some of the things that governments, for me, I think of it from the government side of view. We've seen a lot of AI-enhanced communication, and this really is helping with accountability and effectiveness of government. We've seen a lot of solutions go online and how the governments are able to communicate or preempt to communicate with their citizens. I think it's not all, because there's still a lot of work to be done. But I think there's a lot of more services that have come online and with the chatbots, whereby you're now able to communicate and get basic information before which you could not get, and in multiple languages. So the language factor, I think, is having that diverse reach is one way. But again, it's to the limited, those who are able to communicate, who have the devices, who can do this, and ensuring that we enhance that scope, that reach of people who can get access, I think is one way that we are hoping that new technologies will help us advance in that area too, because now it's still very limited to the small 40% of Africans who have access to the internet or are connected.
To the internet, yes, but then the good part is there is SMS, which reaches a much broader group. In fact, the way we've helped make the adoption of AI across Africa more palatable with the African governments is that we've advised them to split things into builders and users, right? And so when you talked about the power problem earlier, it's almost impossible to solve the power problem for the users, but you can solve it for the builders. If you had just 1,000 people in your country who are going to be your AI scientists, I'm sure you can provide them 100% power across the entire year, and I'm sure you can provide them GPUs to use. That's all you need. Those are your builders. And then you have to instruct your builders to build for the people in your country wherever they're at. If they're on WhatsApp, you build AI solutions that you deploy on WhatsApp. And that was the case for the last couple of years. And only this year, Facebook joined the pack, which is awesome, with the whole WhatsApp AI piece. I hope you guys use Meta AI on your, it's phenomenal. We actually ran a session with a group of farmers in Zimbabwe, and we taught them how to use that. It's incredible. They're posting all these videos of questions they're asking, how it's helping just drive growth. It's just incredible. So it's instructing the builders to build for the user base. If your users are using SMS, then build an AI chatbot that they can send a text message to. And let's not wait for the connectivity to be fixed. That should continue improving, but in the meantime, build for users in the country you're building for.
One other point on builders, I think that it's really important to ensure that it's not just industry developing these solutions, that government workers have a role to play here in showing how to smartly and responsibly use AI to deliver services more effectively to citizens. That can really both sort of obviously improve service delivery, but also be a good model to industry and to workers who didn't think they had a stake in AI to understand how they can use it. I think back to sort of earlier efforts in the United States to address issues like electrification. And you actually needed to go out there into the world to show people how to use electrification in a positive way. And if AI is going to be the same kind of general purpose technology that's capable of doing these impressive things, there needs to be a similar kinds of an AI core or some kind of effort to get out there and model the effective use of these technologies. So that can be both a public and a private partnership ultimately, I think. But we need to be thinking together how to really demonstrate these technologies to the world.
I love this point because I was thinking about this the other day, how in Manhattan, when the grid first came online and Lower Manhattan was the first to receive electricity, you had people in that part of the city scared, like, what if it comes to the sidewalk? What if it comes out my tap in my bathroom, when it comes to the water? But you also had people several blocks away going, well, when do I get it? And I feel like we're going to, because we are going to face many of those same challenges all over again right now. So as we come towards the end of our time here, where should we be focusing? When I say we, I mean, the policymakers, the journalists, those, the stakeholders, in order to make sure that this is, as it's been brought up several times on stage rightfully, that this is something that happens with and for people and not to people, where should we be focusing?
Okay, I think I can start. For me, I'll just give it a simple word of inclusivity, but it's a very heavy word because inclusivity is in a broad spectrum. First, we need inclusivity on what we're saying, on the conversations that are defining where we're going with AI. We need the African continent to be on that table. We need to define our agendas. We also need inclusivity. I like the example you said where government people need to be able to use these technologies. We need to capacitate. So there needs to be a lot of training in this. We also need to ensure that we continue to extend the connectivity in the country. So we're ensuring that this is happening, the benefits are going equally, or at least people are able to to engage with AI equally without those who have and who cannot because of the digital divide. So as the inclusivity.
Yeah, like for AI to have this positive effect that we hope it will have, I think you need obviously the investments in infrastructure to enable people to have access to the underlying technology. So that's the first area, ensuring we don't have an AI divide and making sure that we don't replicate those mistakes of the past. But then I think, yeah, just again, doubling down on the need for skilling and education. I think oftentimes there's that just isn't central enough, the policy conversation. How do you really think through an effective way to train and reskill and re-educate people to ensure that they are taking advantage of this technology in a positive way? If you look at sort of the history of like jobs in the US at least, about 60% of the jobs we have now didn't exist in 1940. They're just brand new jobs, and much of the job growth is coming in areas that just weren't part of the conversation. So in the same way that before electricity, there are no electricians, and we need to figure out what are the jobs of the future that we can create today and start creating today. I think this is going to require a lot of forward thinking and a lot of partnership between governments and industry and civil society and academia to figure out where are these new jobs coming from and how do we train for them effectively.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. So from my end, I think across the continent, we have now trained, over the first 100,000, builders across the continent, thanks to all the different programs I mentioned before, including what Google's doing. So those first 100,000 people, more than that, have been trained. And there are also platforms where you can actually go see leaderboards of the top data scientists in Africa. So if you're looking for the top data scientists in your country, let me know. I'll tell you who it is, right? So that's there. Data sets have now been, arranged and put together by the different organizations I mentioned before, from Mozilla to Masakane to Data Science Nigeria, and many of them. The data sets are there. What's missing for these first sets of builders is the compute. And the way I'll simplify that is super fast computers. Without these computers, you can't build AI, solutions. It's very, very difficult to do it. You wait many days for the thing to get trained, whilst someone else who has access to these computers, it's happening in a few minutes or hours, right? So that is ultra critical. And it's a tough problem to solve in that, the first phase is convincing governments and private players that this is important. Thankfully, that is starting to happen over the last couple of months. When they eventually understand that is important and then they have the funds to spend, they're going to get to the next problem, which is supply. The whole world is fighting for this gold. This is the most important gold on the planet today. Everyone's fighting for it. At that point, we're going to need our governments to negotiate with the providers of this technology and figure out how we get some of it to Africa.
I think so the next phase of capacity building globally is trying to think through if you're, USAID in the US or global development banks, thinking through how do you drive that kind of access to compute and how do you create shared resources around data and other inputs to AI. I think that's really important work to do.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I was going to say thank you for calling it gold and not oil. So we have time basically to close this out. So one final point for each of you. What's something we have not talked about yet, but you feel strongly we should?
You start.
I think accessibility. I do think it is really important. I mean, we talked about the digital divide, obviously, in this context, but just ensuring that it isn't just like the tech and tech adjacent industries that are benefiting from this technology. You really do need to think through, for small businesses, for extremely smallholder farmers and others, how do you make them familiar with the technology in the first place? I think there's a lot of mystification about AI out there already and a lot of hesitance to adopt this technology because of real concerns about hallucination, but also just sort of like, is this really for me? Do I have time in my small business to handle this technology? So finding ways to really make like very quick, tangible education efforts. Google, we have a very short course called AI Essentials that you can sort of get up to speed very quickly. Other companies have similar kinds of projects, but like making those, like scaling those up and making those accessible through government efforts and outreach efforts and through civil society efforts as well. I think it's really important to like just demystify and familiarize a much broader set of people with why these tools and how they can be helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's a question for the audience. How many people use at least one AI tool daily?
Use your phones.
Okay. I think intentionally, yes, because unintentionally we've been using it for a decade. Google search has been using built-in AI. So, yes. Well, I saw a few hands that weren't up. I have to apologize. You might have to step out for this part. JK. But at least we think of being AI ready as using at least 5 AI tools daily, intentionally. So I hope you all leave here encouraged to try to find your top 5 AI tools that you're going to use, because the future is really around using these tools and using them to drive more productivity and enjoyment of your work. So please, let's all get AI ready.
I think for me, what I would say, one thing is we need more AI champions within the continent. I think the conversation of AI is happening, but we have not yet seen a critical voice or a very high-level voice emerge for AI in Africa. And I think that's something as African countries, even the leaders that are here, see how they can elevate that as a critical conversation in every forum that they attend, that we need to start thinking critically about AI in Africa and how the economic benefits and how can we fast track that to get everybody using 5
AI tools.
5 AI
daily,
tools? Okay, I'll start thinking about mine.
Yeah.
All right.
Start with 3.
3? Think about 1.
All right. This has been lovely. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for hanging with us right after lunch, too. Thank you. This is lovely. All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, don't forget your phone. Why are you AI people so absent-minded? He nearly left his phone. Okay, we are moving on to our next panel. I'll tell you all about it in a few minutes because it is particularly special, and I'll explain why in a moment. We're going to get the stage ready for our next panel, which will begin soonest. Thank you. Okay, so 10 minutes, right?